Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are talking national political news of the day. The first topic is, well, Trump won and lost big in court this week, depending on the case you're talking about. Where he did win is in his fraud case in New York. Letitia James had, I guess you could call it a setback. She was looking for a bond of about 400 and some change $1 million. It got reduced to $175 million. I guess that's a victory, something that Donald Trump said that he can handle. This is so that he can file an appeal and doesn't have to pay his full judgment right away, and so he was granted that. He has 10 days to raise it. He got an extension of that as well. Called it a victory, and some people are a little confused at that ruling. There wasn't a whole lot that the appellate court said about it. There are some who think that maybe that's an indication that they'll actually grant a remitter and lower the judgment to something around that. But it's hard to say because the merits of the case weren't actually presented to the appellate court. So that would be interesting. But so that was his win. His loss is in the hush money case. He's desperately trying to get that put off. He wants to have all of his criminal cases put off until after the election. And it's gotten pretty contentious with Judge Burkhan, who is saying no, it's going to be held in about 3 weeks, and the judge, and then Donald Trump was attacking him in the media, attacked his daughter. Apparently, some account that she had, a social media account, had a picture of Donald Trump behind bars. She's no longer associated with that media account, so she didn't put it up. Judge is very upset about it. Some animated discussions in court, and he has also insisted that neither side file any further motions before the trial unless they submit a one-page request, which is very unusual beforehand. So unless something changes, the trial will go forward in a few weeks. And Trump is fuming about that. He does not want to have a conviction during the campaign because there are supporters of his or people who have said that they support him in polls who say they could change their mind if he is actually convicted of a crime as opposed to having been found liable in a civil suit, which has happened so far in 2 cases. Dave?
Yeah, I think that's it. Like you said, it's a mixed week for Trump in these outcomes. But the delaying of the case, has been status quo. So the fact that there's finally a date on the calendar for, I think, middle of April, that's perceived as just, because in fact, we call it the hush money case, but in reality, it's really the fact that the books were sort of doctored to, in a sense, how that money was allocated for I think the lawyer's books, but also because Trump, the lawyer worked for Trump. Ultimately, it's Trump's doing, right? When you account for the political campaign spending and you kind of miscategorize it, it wasn't just like a line item. He's actually being charged with several crimes there. And so I think that one is one that is, it seems like least significant to most folks, but in fact, it's in a sense it's fraud in a bigger scale, or theoretically is alleged fraud. That's what's being discussed there. I think the much bigger issue is that the 5 panel of democratically appointed judges, Democratic governor of New York, appointed those 5 judges who did reduce Trump's amount of bond he had to come up with. I was talking through this with a couple different people, and some people say, well, he might be the luckiest person out there. But I think that they just don't want to be seen as being political. which is ironic considering that these judges, I think, run for office actually to become judges. But the truth is that he was, saying he doesn't have it, and it was an extraordinary amount of money. Now I know that the law says you're supposed to post bond for the amount of the judgment. I think that that's what the Attorney General pointed at, Assistant Attorney General, and said, "Hey, the law is the law. We were applying it fairly." But truth is that $454 million plus, because he would have had to account for, I think, what, $122,000 a day of interest is what people were talking about. It would have been closer to $750 million. Again, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? And so much of this is, at least half the country, or about half the country, perceives the whole, the narrative that Trump throws out there about it being somewhat of a degree of a witch hunt. And if they could take steps to make that look less political, and as if they're treating him, a little bit more reasonably or fairly or something, to that effect, I think that it helps the courts maintain the appearance that it's not a politically motivated set of charges.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think they're kind of in a jam because he was not going to be able to make that bond. That was not going to happen. And so then Letitia James was going to go after his property, and that was just going to be, a major cluster, but did they actually have a legal basis for lowering the bond? I don't know. People were saying maybe this is an indication that they're going to lower the judgment. I mean, I don't know about that, but even so, that's not a basis for doing it. It's kind of interesting that they just want to do it so that they don't become held responsible for having caused him to lose his property while an appeal is still pending. I don't know. If this is the case, it sounds kind of gutless on their part, but I don't know. Maybe there's some area of law that we're not considering. I mean, apparently they didn't really issue much of a written account for their ruling. So that it's certainly nothing that the media is all citing. So it's kind of difficult to know. But the whole point of a bond is to basically ensure that some payment is made while they're delaying, and at least that the interest be covered. And so basically that would probably cover all of the interest, and then she could still go after the property later if the appeal is lost. The property probably isn't going anywhere. Certainly Mar-a-Lago is not going anywhere. So they may have, decided that it's not like a property flight risk. He's not going to try to liquidize all of the property in the meantime.
And so that's what I was going to say. Two things actually complementary to what you'd said. One is there, you can't really believe everything you see in the press, but one of the things that was reported was that they were talking about putting a lien against his home. I think it's Westchester County, and also a golf course that he owns in Westchester County. So in a sense, even though I think he changed his legal residence to Florida, the idea that you're going to go after the primary residence and sort of the key sort of social holding that he has in his home community, that's somewhat, I mean, arguably malicious to even float that idea. But more to the point of what you said is the fact that he actually probably couldn't afford it maybe a week ago, and then what, right? So then you sort of have a standoff in a situation that maybe it's not necessary to do it that way. And when you have a almost $200 million bond to assure that he shows up in court, and he doesn't seem like he's going anywhere. He doesn't seem like he's hiding assets. He's taking it, confronting this head on. So there's that piece of it. I think it's also interesting to just the combativeness of Trump right now. There was that gag order that was placed by the judge, Merchant, saying he should not, threaten or undermine potential witnesses or members of the court or their family. And Trump immediately went, I forget the exact language, but the bottom line is that Trump, whatever he was told not to do, Trump immediately went out and did it, right? He went to Truth Social and he published something, directly about this person's family member. So
Yeah.
this is really contentious and it, volatile. And one last thing I'd say before, sorry, one last thing, is which I think was just pretty out there. We have to mention it because I mentioned Truth Social. Trump had the opportunity to increase his wealth immensely this week, last past week, since we met last, when his company, the Truth Social, the Donald J. Trump media entity, was merged with one of these special purpose vehicles, the entities that are designed for acquisition, valuing his company at billions of dollars. The Truth Social, that only I think did 43 million in revenue and 17 million in profit, or something in that ballpark. But then to say that the entity is worth $3 billion to him, suddenly he has all this newfound wealth, and you could basically assess that is friends or Wall Street associates, to a certain extent, overvaluing this to put more money into his pocket. So there's four-dimensional chess going on, not just three. That in fact, the idea behind Trump is a movement, I think, and the courts just need to continue to, not my judgment, but I'm saying from their perspective, they need to just keep sticking to the laws and trying to be as non-political as possible. And I think some of these developments reflect that.
Yeah, I want to go back to the gag order because the gag order specifically said that he is not allowed to talk about witnesses, jurors, court staff, or prosecutors other than Bragg. He can talk about Bragg and he can talk about the judge. So, what did Trump do? He went out and talked about the judge's daughter because the judge's daughter was not on the list. I mean, so he's going to look for every angle that he can, loophole that he can do, and he's of course, going to again continue to do it until he's going to continue to push these things until the judge is willing to basically hold him in contempt. And so far, judges haven't done that. He's carried on and acted up, and until judges are willing to treat him like they would treat anyone else and treat his attorneys like they would treat any other attorney, he's going to continue to do this stuff. So we'll see. But Mercan is he's actually being a little bit more firm than some of the other judges have been. We'll see how this goes. The With regard to Truth Social, I mean, the stocks went through the roof when on opening day. I mean, with the merger. Now, I don't know what other products this company, parent company, has. I don't know who uses Truth Social or how big it is. If it has a model, Twitter never made a profit ever, right? Or like 2 years or something like that. It's probably not going to make a profit now. But I'm kind of interested to see. I mean, who uses it? Does anybody outside of MAGA use it? I mean, I don't know. So it's kind of an interesting an interesting phenomenon. But apparently, whatever it is, it's working at least for the moment.
So just the rough numbers out there are that if you look at an entity like TikTok that gets 2 billion monthly users, or Facebook that gets 3 billion monthly users, Truth Social has about 5 million monthly users. So it's in a sort of a different space, and it's actually it's not revenue positive for much more than about $1 million and change a month is what is being reported. And again, so this is one of those sort of special purpose entities that was created to take over companies, and that it's a way to a certain extent to circumvent the traditional IPO route. But because Trump holds such a huge percentage of it, and the combined entity is so huge, he ends up, in a sense, like getting grandfathered in. It's not grandfathered, but it's like a backdoor way to have a massive ownership stake in an acquisition entity. So in reality, the Truth Social piece is it's like it becomes the name of the entity, it's more of a way to get billionaire dollars in his pocket, or within reach.
All right. So who were these influencers? Were these billionaires buying up the stock, or I mean, and it wasn't people on the floor of Wall Street?
So the company is called Trump Media and Technology Group. And so, but that's the name that gets, Truth Social and the rest of the media properties that they're affiliated with. It ends up being appended to a much larger pool of acquisition funds. And so, yeah, the fact that it went up was actual traders, and who knows, maybe it's the combination of some of the small users and friends of Trump. But they're only trading a small piece of that, which, a small number of shares that are floated to the public. So much of it maintains in his control. And then so it's like the tail wags the dog in terms of the value.
Okay, so it's backed, so it's safe. I got it. All right. Well, anyway, we're going to see what happens. There probably will be more motions, or at least motions to file motions filed over the next couple of weeks. But it does look like this trial is going to happen, and we'll see how it works out, because I think of the cases, it's the weakest and least interesting, at least to the public.
Justice Thomas, I think that if the question is whether there would be individuals who generally oppose abortion who would have standing and want to challenge FDA's actions, the answer to that is no. But the reason is because those people aren't regulated in any relevant way under FDA's decisions here. Take these respondent doctors. They don't prescribe mifepristone. They don't take mifepristone, obviously. FDA is not requiring them to do or refrain from doing anything. They aren't required to treat women who take mifepristone. FDA is not directing the women who take the drug to go seek out care from these specific doctors. And so they stand at a far distance from the upstream regulatory action they're challenging. And the court has said in many cases that in a situation like that, when you are not the direct object of the agency's regulation, it can be substantially more difficult to establish standing.
The topic of abortion is before the Supreme Court again. And this time, the Supreme Court is facing the question of whereas before Roe v. Wade was overturned on a kind of leave it to the states doctrine, but this potential ruling could, if the anti-abortion movement has its way, limit access to abortion in blue states. This is a case pertaining to an abortion medication, mifepristone. I know I'm mangling the pronunciation, but it is an abortion pill that is a lawsuit that was granted an injunction at one point in the Fifth Circuit, and it is now before the Supreme Court that they are looking for a ban. It was filed. It had 7 plaintiffs, and were 7 doctors, which was very interesting because we'll discuss what some of the issues are. And one of the problems that even some of the conservative justices had were standing. In order to maintain a lawsuit, the plaintiffs have to have standing, which is that you have to have a party who actually was harmed by it. Well, what they're saying is that there were 7 physicians who actually have or were likely to become emotionally hurt by the fact that they would have to struggle between their conscience as pro-life doctors and be forced to perform a service that goes against their conscience. And of course, there have been, apparently, according to the plaintiffs, a rise in ER visits, emergency room visits with these medications, but they aren't proving that this has led to abortions or anything. There have been some people who just women who have gone because there's been increased blood or quite other types of irregularities when they take the medication. But this is a very difficult situation, and they are calling for an absolute ban on mailing this and what has been cited is the Comstock Act, which is an ancient 19th century law, which banned, among things, the mailing of pornography and other things, but also abortion products. It hasn't been enforced since the 19th century. And the question came up as to what its enforcement. Apparently, the only justice who seemed to care about it was Thomas. Even the other conservative justices didn't seem to be concerned about it. But it does seem from the questioning that even most of the conservative justices seem to be skeptical about this. It may be that in this election year, they don't want to hand another weapon to the Democrats because Dobbs, as you know, we have discussed and will continue to discuss, has probably been what has kept the Republicans from taking over all three branches of government, or well, at least the legislative over the past couple of years, and so I mean, we can get into some of the details of the questioning, but Dave, what is this lawsuit about?
So what I thought, a couple of things, again, thank you for the introduction. A couple of things that I thought were interesting from the justices side, like what the responses have been, is that number one, there's a question about the actual standing at all for the case. And so some of the judges like Ketanji Brown, and I think it was also Neil Gorsuch, they were talking about, the court's tradition of typically trying to answer the smallest question that makes sense. And instead of this being escalated to be a nationwide ban on the practice. So they were sort of dissecting the standing itself. So one of the things that I saw that I thought was pretty interesting was that, well, it's deemed to be a safe drug. In fact, safer in many ways, many cases than things as common as ibuprofen. And so that's one of the issues. And also there's already a ruling, there's already a practice of doctors who don't want to perform abortions don't have to perform abortions. And so if there is an emergency room, bleeding incident or something like that, for example, doctors could just let it be known that this is not, another doctor would need to take it on moral grounds, and that there's already protections in place. So it seems like this escalated request based on the nature of the problem. That was one lane that I thought was interesting. And I'll give you one more, and then we'll let you, sort of say what your thoughts are on that. Mm-hmm. The Comstock Act, I think, was another interesting example because while abortion was considered a right granted under the Constitution, Comstock was effectively suspended for this practice. And then so now the question is, hey, well, now that you no longer have a right to one, why can someone receive medicine through the mail? Maybe we need to go back. The questioning was maybe we need to go back to the 19th century interpretation of how mail ought not be used for things like pornography and abortion and things of that nature. So that seems like sort of retrograde, I guess is not the right word, but sort of backwards looking from the, I think a couple of the judges were thinking that that just didn't seem, it seemed out of scope for what was the actual harm. So that Comstock seemed like just not necessarily a forward-looking interpretation of access to a known medicine. And then finally, one last thing, I guess, is they raised I forget who it was. It might have been Alito or something like that, who basically said the FDA seriously looks at drugs. And they said this one is safe. And do we want it to be the case that one, person that potentially, theoretically, might have to perform a procedure that they don't want to perform, that person can then be the tail that wags the dog, again, to use the the metaphor or the simile again. Would that be the reason why an entire class of drugs would be banned for every person in all four corners of the United States because one doctor decides that it goes against their moral desire to perform a procedure? So the justices were very seeming like it was like death by a thousand cuts, that this case doesn't seem like the right case. They're asking too much. They're reaching too far. And it would open the door for any regulation that a very small party has a issue with that would have an implication affecting everyone across the whole country.
Yeah, I mean, the plaintiffs have a lot of problems that not just the liberal justices, but the conservatives were bringing out. I mean, and there's several prongs to this case. It's an attack on the FDA's regulation system, which is very complicated, but on how they make decisions about whether or not a particular drug is safe, and they want to basically attack the structure of that. And so you have this interesting dynamic of conservatives wanting to attack the pharmaceutical industry for having basically stacked the deck in the FDA to make it actually easier for drugs to get by. They're actually fighting what they consider to be deregulation. So it's a fascinating aspect here. But the other problem they have is, as you say, you've got basically the conscience law that protect doctors from having to perform abortions or do anything to support abortions. But as was noted, none of the doctors had to prescribe this drug. None of them have to do it. So it's just the question of, well, do they have to deal with the after effects? And of the 7 doctors named, only 2 even had to do that. But that's even questionable because they're not performing abortions per se. They're dealing with miscarriages after that. So how does that affect their conscience? Okay, maybe they're emotionally disturbed about what they have to deal with, but that's not the conscience is about whether or not they actually have to make a choice. So it's are they saying that they're going to be emotionally disturbed and make a choice to not perform services during a naturally occurring miscarriage? They really have points here, and I'm going to make a prediction at the end of the show as to how this is going to go. I think I can predict exactly how each of the justices are going to vote in this, based on this, and it's not going to be unanimous, but it's going to be interesting. I think, but this is very interesting because, and I do think politics is involved. I do think that, for instance, Kavanaugh and Roberts definitely do not want to have to restrict abortion even further. They know that this will hurt their party. They want to act like they're above the fray, but they know that Dobbs has hurt their party and their conservative causes. They don't want this in front of them. And probably in the future, they will probably vote with liberals to not let it come to the even get to the Supreme Court if it's decided below, right? It's who knows if the liberals will play games and vote with the other conservatives to bring it up. I mean, it's just it's a fascinating dynamic. But this is a complicated case because the Fifth Circuit is kind of goofy. I mean, it allows some of these things to happen. It should not even be here. This case should not have made it past the trial court. It should have been dismissed on a demurrer or a summary judgment motion.
Can you say what makes you say that, just out of curiosity?
Because these doctors don't have any standing to raise this issue, just on that issue alone, and that on that one alone, and probably there's no issue of I don't really understand all the regulatory schemes, but for the court to basically make a decision that the FDA to reverse the FDA, I'm not sure that the Supreme Court really has standing to have an evidentiary hearing to decide that the FDA is wrong on whether or not the drug is safe. And there isn't, they don't even cite that much evidence other than, and I think it was Gorsuch who said, I don't care that there are more that there's an increase in emergency room visits. I need to know if there's an increase in actual health problems. Emergency room visits can mean a lot of things. You need more clarifying data on that. So this was a loose thing, and the fact that it even got to the Supreme Court is ridiculous. It probably wouldn't have, it shouldn't have been heard if the Fifth Circuit hadn't given such a goofy decision on it. It wouldn't have. If they had reversed it to the trial court level, it wouldn't have made it to the Supreme Court. They wouldn't have heard it.
Yeah, I think one of the sources out there, the coverage, if I'm remembering correctly, Washington Post talked about how that in the Fifth Circuit, the judge they took it to a specific judge, Kaczmarek, I think his name was, and they said that this is the first time that an FDA drug has ever been suspended in this way. And in the ruling, the judge referred to as abortion providers as abortionists, which had never really been done in a legal proceeding. And in the solicitor's arguments, they put forward the history of the drug, how it's been used safely for over 20 years, and there are dozens of studies and thousands of people just in the testing alone, and millions of successful uses without any harm, and just how this to a certain extent undermines the FDA's entire sort of drug testing regimen and regime, really. And that I think it was Judge Kagan said basically, like, there's nobody harmed here in this case at all. And it's a contrived case brought through she didn't use those words, but she insinuated that it sort of doesn't pass the reasonability test. So I was curious what you had said about why you thought it never should have made it. It seems like their justices are also aware of the fact that it wouldn't have made it on the merits.
And this is coming this was shortly before an incredible election in Alabama. I mean, they're aware of the politics. I don't know if the special election in Alabama, where it is a little bit of a swing district, but the Republican had won in 2022 by about 10 points. The same Democrat won against a separate Republican. The polls had them roughly even, but the Democrat Maryland Lands won by about 25 points in Alabama last night, highlighting the impact of the Alabama's really draconian laws as it affected in vitro fertilization, making yet once again yet another special election in which a Democrat outperformed the polls, and this time by a huge margin. Again, abortion being the core issue. Republicans do not want this on the ballot, and I have to wonder if the Supreme Court are being argued the day before had an impact on this. We don't know. There's no way of knowing it, but that was like over 20 points difference from the polls in that race. Republicans definitely do not want this being a ballot.
Yeah, nearly 2/3 of all abortions are this is how they're done, and it would send shockwaves, I think, across the country, even in states where abortion is mostly banned. The backlash would be immense.
I watched the debate, it was three rich guys, three millionaires who have spent already combined more than $25 million to, shall we say, win the Senate seat. No mention of the cost of prescription drugs, no mention of manufacturing jobs, no mention of the dignity of work, no mention of pensions or veterans, no mention really of how to secure the border, while the House of Representatives adjourned when we passed with 70 votes support for Ukraine and Israel, all of those things. So it was a sort of vapid debate that they made back and forth. The one substantive thing that they did say is that they all stand with national abortion ban, even though Ohio voters, as though voters by 13 points said they want reproductive rights for Ohioans. So the debate didn't surprise me, but didn't really deal with issues that affect Ohioans every day.
Final segment. We're going to discuss we're going to update the battle for the Senate majority. I think it's still fair to say that the Republicans have the edge in this, although I don't think they have quite the edge that I would have thought they had about 4 or 5 months ago. I have actually made predictions recently on this show that Montana and Ohio are going to be held by the Democrats, despite the advantages that the Republicans have in there. Last week, I predicted, because Montana is going to have abortion directly on the ballot, that Tester, and also just because John Tester is one of those mutants Democrats that can hold it there. Sherrod Brown is ahead in every poll against his opponent, and he got the right opponent. Things can happen. I mean, a lot can happen between now and then, and it's just, but every time pundits keep saying Brown is going to lose for the last 4 elections, and same with Tester. It's Montana, it's Ohio. However, Brown can win and Tester can win, and the Democrats can still lose the Senate. There are other races where they have problems. New Jersey. Menendez, of course, it got into all kinds of legal troubles. He's dropped out of the race. Tammy Baldwin has dropped out of the race. Kim, the insurgent character, insurgent candidate, looks like he's going to win it. The mainstream party doesn't like that. But now Menendez is talking about running as a third-party candidate, as an independent candidate, which could kill. Did I get the candidate wrong who dropped out, the other Democrat?
Murphy in New Jersey, Murphy. You're talking about? Yeah.
Yes, Murphy, the wife of the governor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got that wrong. Sorry. Why did I say Tammy Baldwin? Anyway, so that's possible that a Republican could have a surprise win in New Jersey. There is a strong challenge to the Democrats in Maryland. There is a strong challenge to the Democrats in Arizona. I actually think that Sinema losing the race or leaving the race presents a challenge to Gallego, because I think Sinema would have drawn more Republicans than Democrats in that race. Although Kerry Lake, is still probably going to lose, but the polls are pretty close. And the Democrats are hopeful that Allred could raise a good challenge in Texas, but the latest poll has them 6 points behind. That's not that far behind, but that's an uphill battle against an incumbent. As unpopular as Ted Cruz is there. So they could still lose the race, even if they win in those 2 places where there's a lot of money is going to be spent to defeat the Democrats.
So I think big picture, like 30,000 foot view, thank you for the details that you've spelled out and laid out for everybody, of course, as always. But there are 23 seats that Democrats need to defend and 11 that Republicans need to defend. So that's what's in play. But in reality, there are far fewer states that are actually in play. As we talked about ad nauseum, some people say 12, some say 8, some say 7. But what I think is really interesting is that there are 4 states where Trump is leading in the polls in terms of the national election, but the Democrats are leading in the polls at the Senate level. And so those
Right.
interesting states are Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, and Wisconsin. And then also Biden has a small lead in Pennsylvania. But to Casey's advantage in Pennsylvania, though, he's got a pretty
Yeah.
solid lead. So that state doesn't seem to be one of the areas where it falls apart. And as a reminder, the Democrats only have that 1 seat really to lose. So just again, 30,000-foot view. I think that the latest polling is marginally advantageous to Democrats in those places, meaning that split ticket scenario, which is their Goldilocks scenario that they need, still looks like it can play out. Like you said, we've talked in the past about Ohio, and we've talked in the past about also Montana, because those seats seem, they're pretty strongly red, like you had mentioned these days. But I think it's in a crazy turn of events. Arizona might end up being the closest so far. I thought that Gallego looked really solid from everything we'd seen earlier. But as you said, now that it's a 2-person race, I think it's tightening up a little bit. So just generally speaking, I think it's highly competitive, and there's going to be an ebb and flow going on all the way up to the 11th hour. Some polling really strangely enough leans almost to a toss up right now in Arizona, 1 point only, which is within the margin of error, as I think you mentioned. So it's any party's race. I think it's going to track ultimately with the national election, which, again, if you're just looking at the weather, you're looking at the big picture. Trump has lost the luster. He had a little bit of a lead in many of those 8 states. Yeah. But that's really trending from +4 to -1. Biden's really about a +1 in many of those states. So I would say the weather is changing, and in part, I wish it wasn't over something so superficial. But after the State of the Union, where there was so much media attention saying that the president was infirm physically and mentally, and he came out as relatively firm, and that might have been enough to kind of to stop the bleeding. And anyway, we're talking about the Senate. I think that that helps. It does nothing but help any of these Democratic candidates.
Yeah, I agree. Now, the reason that I had Tammy Baldwin in my mind is she's facing a tough challenge in Wisconsin. I don't think she's going to lose it. I think she'll be fine. But it is a race that they're going to have to spend some money in. They're going to have to come up with money on there. The real danger, all out of the blue, is in Maryland, where Republican Larry Hogan is actually ahead in the polls. Part of the problem is he doesn't have an opponent yet. The Democrats have to hold their primary, and they're not big name Democrats. Where the Democrats can be hopeful in that is that in the very same poll that has him winning by double-digit leads, the very same poll has the majority want the Democrats to hold on to the Senate. So if one of the Democrats, whoever wins the nomination, can make that their campaign, hey, Hogan is great, but do you want to hand the Senate over to Trump? That they could probably turn that around. But Hogan, of course, is going to say, well, Trump doesn't own me, so that it's going to be a tough one there. They could lose Maryland. I'd be more worried about Maryland than any other state.
Eric, I'll just add for folks, because not everybody follows this as closely as you or myself. Hogan, the sitting governor, right? He's very popular. Yeah. He's very moderate. he was considering a run for president because of his bipartisan appeal. When I lived in Maryland, actually lived in Baltimore, and these are rough numbers from many years ago, but it was like just under half the people in the state are Democrats that live inside of Baltimore, in the area around Baltimore, and just over half, I think it was voters, just over half of the voters like live in the more rural counties in the outside the exurbs. And so there is just a natural built-in advantage in the population of Maryland that goes with those rural areas. And Michael Steele, I think, was lieutenant governor there, former lieutenant governor, former head of the RNC, very moderate. In fact, he's so moderate that he's been working for MSNBC for a long time as a voice of reason amongst moderate Republicans. So they have a tradition of being somewhat outside the capture of MAGA, and Hogan is certainly benefiting from that.
Yeah, and if he doesn't endorse Trump, or even does something actually earth-shaking, and endorses Biden, he guarantees himself a win, and that is in the realm of possibility. It's happened before. So I mean, that is a very interesting one. I think Gallego could probably reverse things. I don't know what is happening. I think there's probably a lot of the cinema voters. He's just going to have to really work to get some of them. But you're right, although the interesting thing in Nevada is everybody thought that the incumbent there was vulnerable, but the polls don't seem to be showing that at all. And we've been seeing over the past couple of years, is everybody thought that Biden's unpopularity would affect all of these candidates, but didn't have any impact on the midterms whatsoever. His unpopularity didn't seem to have any negative impact on the down ticket, but it actually probably will, if he does gain in popularity, it probably will float candidates. He probably would have coattails, because then everybody would be doing fine. And you're right, he has surged since the State of the Union address, and it's probably brought attention to the economy. There is a lag time. They may finally be starting to give him credit for some of the economic news, and especially if inflation is in check, and the fact that wages have kind of kept up with inflation in a lot of respects. You still, though, even if you can afford it, you're still looking at those prices of restaurants and things, and it still irritates you. When 5 years ago, a sandwich was $8, and now it's $13 in a delicatessen, right? It's still, you just don't like that. But again, now all of a sudden Maryland is on the board. The Democrats are playing whack-a-mole on the defense, and the only offense they really have is Texas, and that's a long shot. Not impossible, but a long shot. So they have to be very careful, and they could lose in Wisconsin. They could lose in these other places, but and they have to be careful as to how they're spending their money. But they do have another possible advantage, is that Trump is probably going to take a lot of that RNC money, and so these candidates are probably going to be scrambling for money, as he doles them out. He'll probably give some to Kerry Lake, but he's not going to give any to Hogan.
You actually read my mind on that, because there was reporting recently about how it actually drew a little map of the diversion of money towards Trump's legal fees. So it's not even just his campaign. We talked last week about how the campaign has been asking for more and more money online, but they're actually, the political action committees, the super PACs, the fundraising committees and entities, they all seem to be channeling money towards Trump. And so that's, again, at the margins, it's taking away from money that could be spent. Like you said, in Wisconsin, Baldwin should be solid, but if there was enough money there, if there was a concerted campaign, it could be quite different. And also, I think similar I agree with you, rather, what you said about Arizona, that Lake, again, not everybody follows this exactly as much as we do, but But Lake in Arizona, her situation is that she's all in on anything related to Trump and his election denial claims. And Gallego has I think the most recent polling, he has a small lead. If there was a lot of money and a lot of concerted effort there, you could imagine it going the other way.
Yeah. And, again, we don't know. I am a firm believer in the Dobbs effect. I'm just, the pundits don't want to acknowledge it. 538 still resists it. But if there is a Dobbs effect, that would probably play out in that election. If there's a Dobbs effect, does it apply to Biden? I don't know. That's untested. But it could play out with, if there is one, it probably is going to have an effect in Texas. But is it going to be enough? I don't know. There's a lot going on in Texas, and we really aren't going to know what the voters there are thinking for a while. And I bring up a concern in New Jersey, but Menendez has said that he would run if he clears his legal problems by then. And I don't know what the chances are that he's going to be free of his legal problems. So, that's probably a minor concern. I think Kim is probably going to be the next senator, which will also be very interesting because he's a very interesting person, and very dynamic. Again, I think the Democrats have a reasonable chance, but a few months ago, it was just a question of, can they hold on to Ohio, and can they hold on to Montana, and can they hold on to Arizona and Nevada? Well, it's opened up a little bit since then. Okay, maybe they've got a small chance of winning Texas, but with Maryland opening up, and it's iffy as to whether or not New Jersey has opened up, but still, it makes it a mess. Cook report hasn't opened up New Jersey. It might be that I'm overthinking it, but anyway, it's but Maryland, that's a big chance. Cook still has it as even because there isn't really a Democratic candidate yet to focus on. They got to choose that and then get some name recognition, and it's a very Democratic state, so they're not going to give it to Hogan quite yet. But I'll let you close it out.
Eeny, meeny, chili, beany, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
All right, well, here we are in predictions. What's your prediction?
So my prediction is, I think I mentioned that those states that are going to be the ones that people are paying the most attention to come election night in November: Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. I think that the Democrats are going to run the inside straight and be able to take the Senate seats in all 5 of those, which will be just enough to, at very least, have a 50-50 outcome. But potentially it'll end up being, as status quo will be maintained, 51-49.
Okay, well, going back to the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine versus the FDA, the justices, Thomas and Alito, the 2 most conservative justices, they're the ones that were obsessing over the Comstock Act. That is the 19th century act that hasn't been enforced in over 150 years, that says that you cannot send abortion products through the mail. They are going to vote to uphold the lower decision based upon that. It will be a 7-2 decision overturning the 5th district, the 5th Circuit decision, and the right to Misoprostol will be upheld, and that the abortion pill will not be restricted on that basis. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.